Welcome to Restore, a podcast seeking to restore the vision, restore the mission, restore the church. And now your host, Javier Diaz.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Restore podcast. This is episode 105. My name is Javier, and I'm your host. As always, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing the Restore podcast. I am always thankful and honored that you take the time to press play and listen to the podcast. With that said, on today's episode, I am excited to welcome back Dr. Richard Hickam. He was the minister of music at Whole Life Church, formerly Florida Hospital, for about 11 years. And currently, he is the corporate director of music and the arts at AdventHealth. Nearing the end of the pandemic, Richard founded the AdventHealth Orchestra, an orchestra of healthcare workers who found resilience by playing together during that difficult period. The orchestra is featured on a new album by AdventHealth Music called Imagine Wholeness, which is out now, and I highly, highly encourage you to go and check it out on Spotify, Apple Music. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to the album. I really appreciated this conversation with Richard as we not only dive into this beautiful album, Imagine Wholeness, but also his faith journey and so much more. Richard was first on the podcast way back in episode 12, by the way, with two other worship leaders as we talked about worship, music, and the church. He was also on episode 68 for a short segment when, at the time, he released an album while worship leader at Whole Life. So feel free to go and check out those episodes as well. Before we jump in, I want to make sure that you listen all the way through as we feature the title track, Imagine Wholeness, at the very end of this episode. I hope and pray that you will be blessed as you listen to that beautiful song. With that said, here's my conversation with Dr. Richard Hickam. Dr. Richard Hickam, welcome back to the Restore podcast.
Wow, so formal. So, please don't call me Dr. Maestro will be fine.
Maestro.
No, I'm just kidding. No, that's even a good place to start because I grew up, kind of in Collegedale, right? Some people went to school there, but I finished elementary school, high school, college. I taught, got married there, had kids. And so Collegedale is kind of for being in East Tennessee, it's a valley unto itself. It's kind of a formal place.
Right.
And so, I, kind of dressed the part, right? I grew up a lot in the 80s. And so I wore a tie to high school a lot of time, even my guys. And, we kind of did that thing. And then when eventually I moved to Florida, let me just say, when I was in college and I would tour with musical ensembles and come on tour to Florida, it struck me as odd that people were what I was, kind of dressed down for church.
Casual.
Yeah. It was kind of foreign concept. And just to show you, how much of an idiot I am, we'll just start right here is, I even thought less of them because of the way they were dressing, because that's where I was at that time before God had to teach me a number of lessons.
Sure.
But as I've come down here and as I've realized that, it's a less formal place, people love God just as much and it has nothing to do with anything. So it's just culture.
Sure. Well, no, thank you for that. I also want to be respectful to the fact that, listen, when you were first on the podcast 7 or so years ago, it's crazy. We'll have the episode.
Was I a teenager then?
I think we both were, right? Let's go with that. You technically were, I think you were working on your doctorate, right? So at that time, I couldn't call you a doctor. Yeah. And then you did a segment when you released, you were still at I think at that time it was Florida Hospital, maybe not. Maybe it was Whole Life at that time. You were releasing your album when you were working at the church. And by that time, I believe you were almost done. 2021, were you done with your doctorate then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but I don't think I addressed you as that. But now, since this is a whole fresh, we're going to get into all kinds of wonderful things here that the Lord has blessed you and what you're doing now here at AdventHealth. I always like to start with that respect. But from now on, I'm just going to call you Richard.
Perfect.
So, all right. So,
perfect.
With that said, but thank you for coming back on. I'm really excited about this conversation. And just seeing the way that God has guided you. I think it's a beautiful thing to help restore the vision, the mission through the arts, through music. And I encourage people to go back and listen to that first episode. That there were others involved there, Tammy, Denner, and that's more of a music and worship in the local church. This is something completely different, if I can say it that way, that I'm excited to see, to have you speak into. But with that said, I want to start actually, if you can tell us a little bit more about your calling and love for music. I mean, when did you first sense that? What was that like? Was there people in your family musically inclined? Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, great question. I grew up with particularly a mother who was musical, and I came from a family where my mother was an Adventist, my father was not particularly religious, and so we had kind of a different childhood. My mother taught us and took us to Sabbath school, did church, all those kind of things. But our Sabbath might have looked different than other people. So we might have done things like gone to the library. We would, still maybe spend some time outside. But my dad did not accompany us to church. Sometimes he worked, he did whatever, but always loved, always, they made it work. But that being said, my mother was the musical influence. She played piano. I had other relatives on her side who were musical. I had a aunt and uncle who were music professors at Union and PUC, Mel and Jean Hill, once upon a time. And my father's side were really kind of just hillbilly country people. And but what I learned from that was, my dad liked Elvis and liked, Johnny Cash and country music. So there was an influence of kind of that Tennessean, that piece, and my mom was the Californian and kind of also the Loma Linda, but the classical. But one big influence from my childhood that I really remember is that my grandfather, on my mother's father, he bought us, and this takes you back, one of those tape club memberships.
Oh boy! And
so we would get the 8-track of classical music. So I would get these things from the Philadelphia Orchestra or the Boston Pops, and my mother would play them in the car, and so I'd listen to a lot of Beethoven symphonies or pops, classical music. And I grew a deep love for that as a young person, but also would listen to all kinds of other music as well. So it wasn't anything. So that's very young. But later on, band, loved all that kind of stuff.
Now you mentioned band. What was the first instrument that you played?
So, I started like a lot of people with the piano, which is a great foundation. A lot of people don't, carry on with it. And I was one of those as well. Like I didn't love it, but when band came, the first instrument I wanted to play was the flute, and I picked it up, but I couldn't make a sound out of it. And so second, the guy handed me a saxophone, and the rest is history there. So I played the saxophone. But in high school, I started to grow bored because I made it to first chair my sophomore year, and it didn't have the fun parts in high school band, but the first trumpet, they were the coolest. So I decided to make a switch, and I hit the practice room at a study hall, and for a year I practiced, and then the next year I made it to first chair trumpet. And so my senior year in College Hill Academy, Orlo Gilbert came across the street from Southern's orchestra, and he was looking to recruit some string bass players to play in his orchestra. And Mr. Bolton said, well, Richard's learned an instrument. He'd probably do it. And I walked into Orlo's orchestra room, and the sound of the orchestra was like a wave that hit me, and I knew that this was my place. So kind of a late start for an orchestra, and to eventually become a conductor. But I loved it. It opened so many doors for me. Particularly, Orlo Gilbert was a dear mentor to me. Pushed for excellence and striving for what you would almost think of unattainable goals, and that desire has been something that's carried with me in my career.
Beautiful the way that the Lord guided you, used people like this individual you mentioned to empower you in that. And so you're playing these different instruments. You go from the piano you mentioned to the saxophone to the trumpet, this passion for orchestra. when do you sense the call to say, I want to do this for a living, right? I think can I say it's a bit unique in that sense, right?
Yeah.
As an orchestra leader, did you envision yourself? Because for those that know you and listen to the previous episode, you were the worship leader at Whole Life, Florida Hospital then for about 11 years, right? And so, and you did a lot of things there. We can go back and play that or speak into that. But here we're talking about your starting. Were you thinking, man, I can be a worship leader in the church? What were the thought process as God is calling you to music full time?
Yeah, so there was quite a journey to get to other places. This was in the late 80s, early 90s when I started to go to Southern, and there weren't worship leaders.
That's what I was going to say.
There were very few
Yeah.
ministers of music. I mean, on one hand, you could count in our denomination a full-time.
Which all of them were in the, quote, big institutional
They were big
churches.
institutional churches, and they all had other things that they did. They taught, so that our denomination has not really embraced that as something that as a paid position at that time. Some things kind of changed. Some things over time have grown.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, what happened was then my mother had passed away, and my father not being a Christian per se, I had a lot of choices. I started kind of this road. I don't need to go. We don't need to take this time to talk about all of that. But let's just say I moved to California, became a bartender. I played in a ska band. I played acoustic Latin jazz. I was just kind of going through that early 20s, figuring things out. School, I dropped out a couple times. Eventually, hit my bottom. And decided. I actually, uniquely for me, I was in my grandparents' basement and I started reading. I believe it was Steps to Christ, and something that I had really just shrugged off. Suddenly, the Holy Spirit used something, and that pointed me to Scripture. I started getting into that, and then I came to this moment that I needed to leave this behind. I needed to go back. I had heard that Southern's orchestra was going on tour to Scotland and England, which, I had some heritage there. And, what's funny, what God can use as a motivator when it's time for a change. So everyone has their own unique story. For me, I was going to Scotland. I was determined to come back, make this change, leave things behind. So anyway, I did. I left that behind. I threw some stuff away in the desert, and I came back. And for a year, Orlo let me play in the orchestra, but I didn't attend Southern. I didn't have the money. I was trying to figure things out. And this is funny. I was working in construction. First of all, I'm a klutz. Me in construction is the big joke anyway, but I needed a job. I was working. People were kind to me. And I decided to go see my old academy band teacher, Mr. Bolton. I walked into his classroom in Collegedale. He looked at me and he said, I can't believe you're here. He said, Richard, I have 110 students in band this year, and I need an assistant. Would you work with me?
Wow.
And, Collegedale Academy only had 300 some students. There was a huge amount of kids that were in there. And so I'd love to, this is what I know. I didn't really, still wasn't quite clicked as a career. But then a month later, his wife got breast cancer. So he started needing to go to appointments with her. And so all of a sudden I was directing this band of 110 high school students by myself, and I hadn't been to college yet. And I didn't have all the tricks of the trade, but something clicked. And that's when I knew.
Wow.
That's when I knew music education was where I needed to go. And then from there, just everything kind of fell into place. Then I got enrolled, started taking, blah, blah, blah. And his wife, thankfully, she recovered, whatever. But that was a transitional point for me when I knew that God had opened this door. And it was something, because people always said to me up until that point, oh yeah, you're going to do, music, da, da, da. And I was like, no, I can't make money. I can't support family. And once I let God take the lead, Javier.
Yeah. Well, praise the Lord, man. Thank you for sharing that. And God has been leading in your life, hands down. And I appreciate, we're all busy people, as we say in quotations. And so, but I appreciate coming back and having this conversation and just seeing the way that God has led you from, I'm going to say it again, from when you were worship leader at the church here locally at Whole Life now, but then now to this current role that's been going on for several years. And I'm glad that we are doing it now, where you were able to develop some of the things. I'm here at your beautiful studio, AdventHealth Music Studios, that you who are at the forefront of creating. It's incredible. So tell us a little bit about your current role, right? So it's called Corporate Director of Music and the Arts, right? I don't know too many other hospitals that have something like this that I'm aware of. Not that I've, to be honest, not that I've like checked every single hospital in the nation per se. So just for those listening, but I'm not aware. If there is, hey, you guys can let me know, those that are listening. So tell us a little bit about what does this title entail? What does it mean? What is your role here when it comes to music and the arts? And the mission of AdventHealth, right? Extending the healing ministry of Christ now through the essence of the arts and music.
So I work in mission and ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that as I was minister of music at what is now Whole Life Church, leadership from, at the time, Florida Hospitals started asking me to help them with some events. You know, there's a lot of conferences they do, and they would spill into the weekends, and they would have worship services, and they would say, hey, could you come with us and put together a group? And, you know, my shtick is that I like to get people involved. I like to find out, oh, you used to play this in Cat. When was last time, you know, what would you think about picking that up again? And I could help you. And so kind of just getting people together. So I've developed over the years a number of teams in the community. I put together a little church orchestra, which happened to have a lot of what are AdventHealth people in it. And so
Sound Doctrine.
Sound Doctrine was our jazz band. Yeah. And I think it's almost time for that to come back up. But so that kind of grew. And then when Terry Shaw became CEO, he was having me do some more and more events, and it just kind of grew. You know, it's like like anything, when you're doing something and things are kind of going, they just, oh, well, could you do this? Well, could you do this? So, but it started with events. And then what happened was, they hired me, and the pandemic happened, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're all just kind of, you know, saying, well, how can I help? You know, I'm not a clinical person, but I wanted to contribute in some way. And so as things were kind of starting to die down a little bit, I said, man, we had a conference on mission coming up. And I thought, man, it'd be great if I could get this orchestra together of team members, and we could honor those folks who have died, both team members and also kind of recognize those in our communities. So we got together and we played this piece called the Barber Adagio, a piece that's been recognized in times of national mourning. And we recorded a video down at the Dr. Phillips Center, and there's a kind of a stirring moment. Everybody's wearing, you know, normal dark orchestra stuff, and they're playing. Well, at the very end, as the lights go down and we would like stand to take applause, there was no one there because this was the pandemic. The lights come back on, everybody stands up, but they're all wearing their scrubs and their white coat and their what they would wear to work every day. And it was a very poignant moment about caregivers and how the arts can play a role in their own resilience. And from that point, something kind of struck a nerve and I got permission then to move to a full orchestra and to get more people involved. And so that's what we've done. We then opened this space here, Symphony Center. It was a little over a year and a half ago. It's become the home base for our orchestra, and which is kind of my bread and butter. But it as it's grown, you know, some side notes. You know, we're going to play at the GC next summer. We're going to be there the final weekend, which we're really excited about.
Awesome.
We're going to play at the Kennedy Center on President's Day in 2025 in Washington, D.C. So it's a really special group, and we work really hard. And I also yet have to be mindful that these are very professional, busy people. And so it's that balance of busy people. But what I've heard from them, and this kind of goes to, I work much more with team members than I do with patients, although there can be some instances where I do it. Again, I'm not a clinical person. We do have music and art therapy, which we can talk about as well. But with music, and and since I'm in mission and ministry, how does it affect the spirit?
Yes.
How do the arts impact the spirit?
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's what research is just getting into. Music therapy is the most studied of the therapies related to creative arts, but even that's only a couple decades old. It's a very new thing that's out there, and so it's a great time to be here. So there's an umbrella group that I'm a part of called NOAA, which is great, isn't it? Whatever, but definitely it's not a Christian group, I can assure you that, but it's the National Organization of Arts and Health. And so they recognized our orchestra last year as they said that we were one of the finest examples in the country of how the arts can impact team member resilience. And so that was a big deal, a national organization. And so so we have research about this, and we're going to study it further, but it's basically this kind of 2-pillar stance. And one is the arts, right? So there's intrinsic things about the arts: drawing, storytelling, photography, drama, music, all dance, body movement. They all can work together. God created us to be creative, to engage in that way. So that's one pillar. But the second pillar that really addressed the times in which we live, the anxiety, the depression, the isolation, is doing it together. So there's something when we come together as a group. And this is why congregational singing is so impactful, something that probably a lot of our listeners can relate to. When actually you get people singing, and that's a whole different thing, the right song, right? Yeah. But when everyone is in it, there's something very special that happens. And there's been research that has looked at choirs when they're singing, and at times they will measure their heartbeats. And because a choir breathes together, their heartbeats will beat in unison together. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
And so there's some really special things that happen when we sing. We're using our body, we're standing together, and we're together. So that's an example of what happens in an orchestra. These are people that have been doing this for decades, but even I've learned to appreciate, as I've grown into this role, drawing and painting, which by nature I'm terrible at.
Yeah, me too.
But I do these exercises, and I've learned that it's not about the act of drawing. It's about the act of being with people. It's about the act of storytelling, and even just the way that we move the brush or the strokes it's good for our bodies. So there's a lot there.
No, I appreciate, there is a lot there. But I appreciate expanding on that. And it's the essence of, and tell me if I'm wrong or feel free to expand here, kind of in a similar sense, and you alluded to it and mentioned it, when a congregation comes together, right? And so this power of singing, power of coming together, and whether it's 50 or 25 or 100 or more, but you feel a sense of community. And you feel a sense of resilience as you're giving praise to God. Whether you can sing or not, that's not the point. It's the community-based aspect, that it's a small microcosm of what we hope will be when Jesus comes, and all of those redeemed singing, right? And coming together. And going back to what you're doing here, and this is where maybe you can speak a little bit more into it, as you mentioned, that this plays a role in the resilience of the healthcare workers.
Yes.
Right? And that's in part like what you're doing, in a sense of empowering them, bringing them together, using their talents in the arts, in this case, music. And as they come together, they feel re-energized, maybe. They feel that resilience coming as their music is used.
I might even say,
is that fair?
As an AdventHealth employee, they feel whole.
They feel, hey, that's good.
So one thing that I like to think of in the arts in this is that, can the arts create mini wholeness moments in your day? So, sometimes we might at work, we might go for a walk.
Yeah.
Maybe when you're coming into work, Like maybe someone is right now, they're listening to a podcast, but maybe they were just listening to some music.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there was something there that they did. So I believe that the arts as a way of life, incorporating it in your life, in your family's life, in your church life, that these will have the power to make us feel whole.
Mm. Could you tell us maybe a story of a healthcare worker, you don't have to give the name, of course, that perhaps you spoke with or came to you and said, this coming together has empowered me in my journey of faith to be able to continue in resilience to do what I do here at AdventHealth? Have you heard any stories in that sense?
I've heard stories over and over again,
Awesome.
which brings me the greatest amount of joy.
Yeah.
So I think that the most vivid example, and it is a bit extreme because it was during the pandemic, but I have a physician who was working right here in Altamont, and she was working with COVID patients, and the outcomes were not always favorable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had to carry a lot of weight. We had to figure out, people are so critical about healthcare worker. It's so weird to me, this whole thing, like they had all the answers. They're trying to figure this thing out.
Right.
They did the best they could with the tools they had, and they had a tremendous pressure and burdens on them. So anyway, there was this lady, and we were going to have a rehearsal that night for that video I was talking about. Well, she called me up in the afternoon. She said, "Richard, I've realized that I've left my cello at home." And she said, "But I've been working with COVID patients all day, and it's very important to me that I come to this rehearsal tonight for my state of mind." And so she got off. But she didn't just look good. She lived in Windermere, right? And I'm 3 miles from Altamont Hospital, so she drove to Windermere to get her instrument, and then drove back up here to come to rehearsal, because for her, it was the outlet. It was the peace in her life that was going to bring her that resilience that she needed to get through the day, and to do it with colleagues, to do it with people who could understand what she had gone through, and then to play her cello. So there's a lot of pieces there. So I hear, and then I hear stories like that. I hear people that talk about this, and then how that they've now use these expressions of instruments to take to their local church. I used to do this. Now I've gotten back into playing my flute. This one girl has told me, and now I'm back to sharing those gifts in my local church. So a lot of these folks had put things kind of in the closet. Life is busy, right? You get a profession going, you got kids going, you sacrifice the things you love, and you support those around you. You pour into other people. And so this thing has come at a time where we've said, hey, I just asked the question, what would you think about getting back into it? And if it's, for some, they're still not at that point. For some, they come for a while and then they need to leave. They need to go do things. But for a number of people, it's that passion, that love, that gift, that blessing in their life. And now then to see them out and sharing it with others. I've seen small groups forming and then going now to serve in local areas.
I love that, and I love this conversation. It's a bit of a unique one here in the podcast, in essence, because we're really trying to promote the power of music, the power of the arts, of course, but also within the context of health, in particular in a hospital context, empowering community through music, as you mentioned, which really is a reminder and example for local churches, right? The understanding of the power of the arts and music.
So you touched on patients and people. Let me just talk about briefly about how there's been this slight turn from where, so I work a lot with chaplains, right? So chaplains,
yes,
they used to work strictly with patients and patients' family, which is still primary, right? If they're in need, there are they need to be there at those critical moments, particularly when grief is involved or people getting difficult news. They need to be there for those. But chaplains need to pour into the caregivers. When a chaplain pours into that nurse who's going to be the most interactive with that patient.
Right.
When the nurse is spiritually empowered, then it multiplies. And so in that sense, that's where I also pour into the chaplains. So whether it's my more music ministry, like we just had a conference on mission, or we just had a big art show where we got all of the team members that wanted to be involved with painting, with drawing. We had a big gallery from across the system, 11 states and 50 some hospitals, and to showcase, we called it Illuminations of Faith. So team members expressing their faith through the arts, and then for them now to form new relationships. They got to meet each other. And so I'm growing a network of people who are expressing themselves in faith through the arts. And so pouring into these people who then pour into the patients, the families. And so that's been a little bit of a change of thinking over the last several years.
I love it. It's, again, an example of empowering resilience through arts and music into, in this case, as you mentioned, the chaplains that are doing it also to the healthcare workers and empowering them so that they can be empowered to continue forward to what they do on a daily basis, right? Where the chaplains have their role, but like, as you stated, the healthcare worker is going to be there, the one handling, obviously, most of the time. So I love that. It's a community helping each other, right? Helping each other in their daily aspect of extending the healing ministry of Christ. With all of that said, what has God, through all of that experience, taught you personally in regards to your relationship with Jesus? What has the Holy Spirit taught you in regards to life, perhaps, that you would like to share? What are some of these top lessons that you've learned up to now?
I am so glad you asked this question, because God has shown me something recently about my journey that I didn't see at the moment. And this goes back to when I was thinking about what I was going to do for a doctorate. And just a little more information. When Andy McDonald, who approached me twice when I was teaching at Collegedale Academy about coming to his church, and the reason that happened is because I would bring my groups, like everybody, to Florida to go do the parks. But on Sabbath, my friends attended Florida Hospital Church. And so they said, hey, why don't you bring your band, your orchestra to perform there? And what we did right away, and this is actually thanks to Alan Dela Cruz, who's a nurse. At the time, he was the worship leader there. And I called my friend David Achata, who graduated from CA, and I said, what can we do to be different? Instead of just coming to your church and me being my group coming to your church to play, which is what we see a lot of times. So pastors take note here, okay? So you have a visiting group. And so what we said was, well, what could we do together? Instead of it being like, here's the blank orchestra and they're going to play their piece, could we do something with our members and your group and create something? And so that kind of became my shtick. Whenever I came, we would do the praise band with our orchestra, which at the time was not very common, and this was somewhere in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and so we started this kind of unique relationship, and we look forward to it. And then we would try it even in Collegedale. We hadn't done it in Collegedale before, and some really good things happened. So Andy started approaching me. Well, I went on my first mission trip with my family, which I'm ashamed to say it was like 40, first mission trip, but I got back, and the week I got back, Andy McDonald called me. He said, listen, what would you think about being a full-time minister of music at our church? And again, to our first part of our conversation, I didn't even know we had those in our denomination. And but coming back, I felt like, man, I'm going to pray about this. I'm coming down. We came down. We talked about it. I said, I'm not going to leave my school hanging, only if my principal gives me permission. And I don't know if you know who my principal was, but his name is Murray Cooper. And Murray, who had been in the mission field, he said, Richard, if you feel God is leading you, I'm not going to stand in the way of that. So anyway, we ended up coming down here. But one of the conditions that I said, Andy, I will come down there, but I am interested in pursuing a doctorate, and will the church be willing to contribute to that? And he said yes. And we worked out those kinds of details. And so anyway, couple years down the road, I started going to this experience conference, which had just happened. It's actually happening right now down on Disney Prophet, a national worship leader conference.
Okay.
And I met someone there who was doing a worship seminar, and I found them to be so biblical. And his name is Vernon Whaley, and he was getting ready to start a new doctorate at Liberty University in worship studies. And what I liked about them at the time was that they had a rich appreciation for the history of the church and classical music, but they also embraced the year of our Lord, wherever we are, what was happening now. And so, what can we do? And so I started thinking about that. At the same time, I was looking at Florida State University and getting my doctoral in orchestral conducting, because that had been my passion. So once again, I started praying about this. I don't remember. It was like 2015 or so. And I made the decision to get my doctorate in worship studies. I just felt like that's the door that God was leading me down. And I was just going to leave behind my passion for the orchestra and go for the why questions, because I've always been bugged by the why in worship, and particularly related to music and what we were doing. What is this all about? And so if you're interested in any of that, I wrote a dissertation. You can look it up, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I got into those kind of things. But this is where I'm heading with this story, this long story, is that as I've gotten to where I am now, and I have an orchestra now, and I have much more than I'm due, and I've realized the verse that He put in my heart a couple months ago. And He has said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And basically just sent to me like those couple of times that I've just been like, what is going to serve the kingdom the best? And I kind of put myself on the side. God has just done things that I could never see coming. He continually does that. And one final story, and that is when this whole thing about AdventHealth was coming into play, and I might have said this before to you, I don't remember, but I read a book by Derek Morris. It's like The Power of Prayer or something, praying crazy prayers.
The prayer of Jabez?
No. Maybe it was. Anyway, okay, whatever that book was, his challenge was like, pray to God for the things that you can't see. Because, we're always like, okay, here's my list, and spiritual attributes, blah, 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 blah. But I started praying the prayer, Lord, I want you to do the thing that I can't see. And when I started praying that prayer, it was like 6 months later that God started opening some doors and some things that I had no idea, and fulfilling deep spiritual things and things that I'm doing now that I had no idea existed.
So it seems that one of the main things, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that God was reminding you, I can say the Holy Spirit was leading you, was come back and to make sure, maybe we can say it that way better, to seek ye first the kingdom of God. Seek ye first, Matthew 6:33, right? Seek Jesus first.
Yes.
And as we dive into a journey with Jesus, the Holy Spirit begins to open these doors that we never thought imaginable, along with the essence of the power of prayer.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing from you. Is that fair?
That's it.
Powerful. Thank you for the reminder to me at this very moment. And God has answered that prayer in many ways. And one of those ways is that you have this new album, right? And it was just released a few weeks ago as of this recording. The album is now, I'm assuming it's the first one ever of AdventHealth.
It is.
Imagine Wholeness, it's called. People, you can check out the show notes. There'll be links there, but if you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your music. I love the album. my only 2 cents is that it's a little short for me. I want to hear more. Is that fair? Is that okay?
That's good. It's right on. I looked at that time too. I was like, yeah.
It's I may not be using all these musical technical terms here, but just in my thoughts was, and I mentioned this to you earlier, this is an album that I would just listen to as I'm driving. I do a lot of driving just to soothe my soul, listen to the words, beautiful music. But with that said, tell us about how this came to be. The title, Imagine Wholeness. What do you mean by that? What was the purpose of that? Because I know, as you've been talking, everything is very intentional here. Everything is very purposeful, which I love. So tell us more about that album.
So we put this together utilizing a lot of music that I've been writing for AdventHealth for the last several years. And I will throw a shout out to my co-writer, Chad Carlson, in Nashville, who is a Forest Lake graduate. And Chad also attended Southern.
All right.
But he found that the recording arts was what he was into. He did some other things. Eventually, he went to Nashville, apprenticed, got some side work, and was on the first 5 albums recording this new girl who no one had heard of. Her name was Taylor Swift.
Oh, wow.
So he won 2 Grammys for the first album of the year, record of the year, just because he was an engineer. Anyway, he's a great songwriter. He's a great guy. He's a beautiful Seventh-day Adventist friend of mine, and he's up in Nashville, goes to the Madison Church. So anyway, Chad co-writes with me and produces. This is the second. He produced the first album as well, but we've been writing these songs for AdventHealth. A lot of internal. So right, we have these themes year by year, like right now, Rooted in Faith or Light the Way or those kind of things. There was one, Rise Up, that was kind of coming out of the pandemic. Forward Together. So there's these kind of things, and a lot based around songs of utilizing love, peace, and joy. So we addressed that somewhat. Catchy tunes, good hooks. They're not super long songs because of what they were written for. But I used a lot of those to put together just to make this first album. And then I included another song. There's one in there particularly that I think maybe your listeners might enjoy the most. Enjoy being probably the wrong word, but maybe even useful because it addresses grief and hope, which is something that I really want to get into in the further albums about the Psalms, and we can go there. But
is that See You Again?
That's See You Again.
Yeah.
And I wrote that song thinking about my own mother's death and about my father, who's, we're all going to face this kind of thing. But those are the kind of things really personal that when you can express and that just kind of comes together. And I already had a friend from high school who reached out, who'd been listening to the album with his father who passed away this weekend, and just expressed, and so then right there, it's all worth it, and so I'm glad for those kind of things. So I would at least say, give it a listen. If you don't like it, move on with your day, bless you. But maybe it could be something that you might be able to use in some way. And if anyone wants to, I can provide chord charts, or I can provide instrumentals for them to if someone was to sing over. So I'm happy to do that, of course. But the title, Imagine Wholeness, wholeness is our big thing here. Our tagline for AdventHealth is feel whole. Right. But it gets a little sticky because people want, whoa, what does that mean? Well, they want a prescriptive piece. But the thing about Imagine Wholeness is that wholeness means whatever you want it to mean. What makes you feel whole? And so that's why Imagine Wholeness. So the song kind of describes, it sets a mood, it sets a tone. And I chose the genre of a bossa nova. And so if you don't know, it's a Brazilian genre. If you can think of like The Girl from Ipanema would be the famous kind of line. It's that kind of beachy feeling, and so it kind of sets up this imagining, and it goes through, how we imagine, and just puts us in a place to kind of picture what wholeness might look like for ourselves. So just some songs that do that. But I will say, because this has been out for, let me think, week and a half, not even 2 weeks. And today, the song, Light the Way, got over 1,000 listens. So finally, there's this metric on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
It's got more than that because it's in all kinds of places, but on Spotify, it got over. So once you hit 1,000 listens, then 1,000 appears on there and it starts tracking so people can see. So I'm excited about that. But the reason why that song did, well, I think it's a good song, but it's because we were able to partner with our friends Take Six, and they sing on this song as well. And they were such a joy to work with. So I'd kind of written this song with Chad beforehand, and then we were going to have this conference on mission. And I thought, man, it would be great to get to see if they'd be willing. And they were. And then we also featured the AdventHealth Orchestra on the track. So it's just our string section, and then we performed it live on Conference on Mission, and it was really great. But they are a unique because they have their roots right with Adventism. And yet they've been in the world. And so at this Conference on Mission, it was like, well, how have you guys maintained true north? So we had a great discussion. It was helpful as an artist to hear about them and how they've done it and maintained their integrity. So anyway, that was that. But the other metric I was going to say about that is that it's been out a week and a half, and I have, it said, at least on Spotify, 851 subscribers. So I've had no help from AdventHealth in advertising or anything. I'm kind of the quiet thing working into this. So there's no thing. I'm not trying to make money. I'm not trying to be famous, but I hope that means the message, which is about wholeness, is about spiritual enrichment, is getting through, and that makes me happy.
Well, I want to encourage people, as you stated, we know music is subjective, but get on there, go on there, listen to it, give it a try. It's 21
minutes of your life.
That's right. As for me in my house, I was blessed. I enjoyed it. I'm going to be listening to it over and over again over the course of time. Again, especially at least for me when I'm taking drives, and I just want to really just be filled with something that's peaceful to me, that's going to empower me, help me in my resilience. Back to that, I think these are beautiful songs. And as soon as you said it, I did love See You Again. I love them all, but I see what you're saying with See You Again. With that said, that title, Imagine Wholeness, and you said that's different things to different people, and I could understand that. What is it to you?
Well, wholeness for me, on a very just personally, since I am a worship doctor person, what's really helped me frame things has been just the classics, spiritual disciplines. We can call it, you can call it whatever name's going to help you feel better in Jesus. I know a lot of people are afraid to say spiritual formation, or you can just say the teachings of Jesus or the practice of Jesus in his life. So whatever that is, but the spiritual disciplines. So the way I live my life, the way that I got up this morning, and I've learned not to, pick up my phone, but to pick up the Word. And when I start there, my day as a way of life, so marinate in there with a little prayer, season throughout the day, walking that walk. To me, that's wholeness. So life's gonna throw at me what life's gonna be. It's gonna be pain. It's gonna be joy. It's going to be rejoicing and celebration, and it's going to be tragedy. But whatever that is, when I have this discovery of walking with Jesus, for me, that's wholeness. And he's, to your Restore podcast, he's restored me, Javier. He's done that thing that I was unable to do. He's brought me to places I couldn't see. He's giving me relationships with people I had no idea existed, and I'm having the time of my life. He's given me that abundant life. And so for me, that's wholeness. That's the thing that he can do, that I can't.
Beautiful. Perhaps we can summarize that in an essence of saying that wholeness for you is essentially walking deeply with Jesus.
Love it.
I love that too. I'm on that same journey. I won't take the time here to go into all of that, but
Is it time for me to ask the questions?
It may be in the future. We may have come back, and it's interesting because I've been asked more than once off, not on the podcast, but those by some who listen, hey, when is somebody going to interview you? And I've said, I don't know. I haven't made that choice.
I like it.
But with that said, I connect so much with what you just said because I am in that same journey deeply, just wanting to walk with Jesus deeply. And that will differ with different people in different ways. And that's a whole nother podcast that definitely I want to dig into at some other point. But thank you for answering that. I really appreciate that. So with that said, incredible album once again. What's next? What's next for AdventHealth music?
Wow. I just hit this huge milestone just a week ago because I released the album. I got to partner with Take Six to do a live,
That's awesome.
I grew up, like one of the kids. So to do that.
I love Take Six, by the way.
You're right.
I want to be very clear.
Not to love.
Yeah.
And I mean, so there's that. And then finally, the thing I mentioned earlier, we did this corporate-wide arts initiative for faith. And as I've said, I can't really draw, but I loved to get those people together. I love to promote and to see. I'm sorry that I don't have in front of us. I'll show you on the way out, but some of these beautiful paintings. I'd like to discover the richness of that. So those three things have got me just kind of catching my breath at the moment, and we'll see what God has in store. I think that the future will be continuing to grow relationships with team members. It will be there'll be more music releases. I will tell you one project that I've been working on, and I think this could apply to your churches or your folks who are listening. But when you walk into any kind of AdventHealth facility, what is the look and feel and sound of that space? So can we do a better job with that? And we recently did a new ER on Disney property, Flamingo Crossing is what it's called. And so we wrote some music. This particular thing, they had this kind of Nemo theme, and so we wrote some kind of like spa music when you walk in. So basically, let's put it this way. If you have got some sort of thing going on, let's say a trauma, it doesn't have to be a trauma, but either you're sick, right? You're not in a good space, and you go into a health care facility, do you want to walk in where there's a television playing a law commercial and your anxiety rises, or do you want to walk into a space that sets up the healing environment? So what does that mean? This is a very complicated thing. What do you hear music? Do you not hear music? Are the sounds? How are the rooms? How are the lights? How all of those things? When you get out of your car in the parking lot, is it like Disney where there's a tone set?
Right.
Or not? These are the questions that I'm starting to explore with people much smarter than myself, to think about and to create an environment of wholeness for those we serve.
Well, I look forward to hearing about that. Most of my doctors and so on are in AdventHealth and coming into the facilities. Yeah, it differs. And I have been in those places where I'm sitting down and I'm watching whatever's on the TV there, or most of the time I'm not watching it, right? Let's be honest, we're on our phones or something.
Yeah.
But what would it be like? I'm just speaking as a patient. What would it be like listening to an Imagine Wholeness album in the background? That's a bit more soothing, and so it'd be interesting. I'd love to hear in the future how that works out.
I'll just do one more plug just for something that we're thinking about, and that is we've partnered a lot in some of our facilities with this sculptor Victor Issa. He does these bronze sculptures. We have them here on the campus. You've seen maybe they're at Loma Linda, Union College, and he has this unique gift for these bronze of telling the stories of Jesus. Even the Pathfinders, just at their big camporee, they had a thing where he did a statue of Moses for them. But, could you walk in and there be a sense of some sort of continuity within the way they look? So could there be one of the Jesus healings there in some way, in some scale that makes sense for the place, but sets the tone about what kind of, that you get the understanding of extending the healing, meaning literally of Jesus.
Yeah.
To folks who may not know, and it's told in a way through the arts.
Interesting. Again, please make sure you follow up with me. I'd love to hear how that sounds on a personal basis, again, as a patient here at AdventHealth, and just to see what that does. Because we're talking about spaces and how that space empowers through music, through the arts.
Well, let me take this back to kind of the spiritual disciplines and the way I start my day, and I don't know how you or our listeners do, but there's a special space that I go to for my devotional reading in the morning, right? It's a sacred space. It's a space that I'm accustomed to, and that it's quiet, and I'm there to kind of, again, to marinate in what's happening. And so I think it's important to think about that kind of ideal with what is it in the modern world, what is it that we can help people to get to those kind of places, and not the place for us for the places where, it raises your anxiety. How can we de-stress and help that environment set the tone for healing?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there with that, because I love that comparison. And absolutely. I mean, I have a place in my home, a couple of places where when I wake up in the morning, that's my go-to, right? That, as you have. And I look forward to that. And so I guess what you're alluding to is, how can we create those spaces within the context of, in this case, AdventHealth, but perhaps even an example in the future of what could be in other places, other hospital facilities as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I would again say, to make it, relative to some of your listeners, is, when you walk into any kind of a facility, dare I say a church, what does it smell like?
Yeah.
What is it? Is it inviting beyond even a person, but is the space, is it something, that is going to set the tone for what we hope happens?
Yeah. I always believed, as much as possible, that when people are walking into, let's say, the sanctuary, whatever that is for their context, that there isn't dead space, right? There's some type of music in the background that is, again, every church is different when it comes to that, but there's something there as people are walking in. Is that, what do you think about that?
I agree. So now we talk about cultural contextualization. What does it mean for your people? But again, you want to set that tone for spiritual healing,
right? For
spiritual welcoming. So it needs, for me, I'll just say, it doesn't need to be too loud,
right? Doesn't
need to be non-existent. It needs to be a space where maybe lighting is appropriate. To think about those things, and not just that, not just me to think about it, but who are those people who get it and can help contribute to that conversation. So it's usually not a person, or sometimes, unfortunately, it is a person, and it needs to be a group of people who get it, and to try and to experiment, to realize you're not going to always, but you find by whatever you put your mind to and you invest in, you're going to figure something out.
Right. Well, again, I look forward to hearing as you continue in that process. Richard, I want to thank you for allowing the Spirit of God to use you. I've seen in part the way God has used you to come full circle, as when you came into, at the time, Florida Hospital, that became Whole Life Church, and then now here at AdventHealth. And I love how God is doing great things in your life. But along with that, I love that you bring it back to your spiritual journey, and that's where it starts. And the outflow of that is a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing your story and what's happening here. I want to give you the last word. Any last thoughts?
Just that God is so good. His gifts are beyond anything we can imagine. If we will let Him lead, I just have found that there's nothing better. There's nothing richer. I thought of the biggest thoughts I could have in my young life, and God has outdone them. And so to everybody, I would just challenge them to pray that prayer. This is where you can test God. This is where you can put it to Him. God, what do you have in store for me that I can't see right now? And let me submit my will to you, and slow down in our relationship together to take the time for you to be allowed to do the things that you would do.
Richard, thank you for your time. May God continue to bless you, your family, and your ministry.
Thank you, my friend.
Well, I was really blessed and enjoyed that conversation, and I pray that you were as well. Thank you, Richard, for your time, and we praise God, as mentioned, how He has blessed you and continues to do so. Make sure to check out the album, Imagine Wholeness. And with that said, here is the title track, Imagine Wholeness, for you to be blessed and enjoy. Until next time, God bless.
Can you imagine a world of possibility? Stories of healing through love and creativity. Close your eyes and just breathe. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. Feel love, joy, peace. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. For you and me. Imagine wholeness. Mind, body, spirit. Holding faith and drawing strength. There is art in healing. There is art in hope today. Right here, right now. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. Feel love, joy, peace. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. For you and me. Imagine wholeness. Right here, right now. Just imagine. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. Love, joy, peace. Imagine, imagine, imagine wholeness. For you and me. Imagine wholeness.